So in this morning's video, I wanted to debunk a very common red pill teaching among many PUAs or red pill teachers, etc. So a very common saying is that women control access to sex and men control access to relationships. And I will tell you that that is incorrect. Men control access to sex and men control access to relationships. The reason being is you have to think of it from the standpoint of a marketplace, right? So you think of supply and demand. Why are things like OnlyFans, pornography, prostitution, why is it so prevalent? Again, most people who are familiar with red pill philosophy understand that women adapt to the environment that you put them in. And so if you take a woman and you put her in a religious environment, that woman will become religious. She will adopt the mentality and the thinking and the morality of the society in which you place her in. Now, if you take that same woman and you put her, let's say, in Miami, where people are very promiscuous, she will adopt the promiscuous mindset of the people that are around her, especially because the men that are in that area will not pay attention to her if she's not promiscuous. A perfect example is when I lived in the city. I used to live in Manhattan. I still have my place, but when I lived in the city, we'd go out all the time and I'd meet women on social media, on Tinder, or at the clubs. I used to go out a lot. And it came to the point where I was meeting so many women that I would talk on the phone and I would literally tell to the person, if you're not looking to sleep around, if you're not looking to have sex within the first date, I'm not even going to bother to take you out. And so the women would conform, or they would either say no, and most of them would conform. And this is why when you have a lot of red pill, YouTubers talking about, well, if you're not sleeping with her on the first, second, or third date, she's more than likely sleeping with somebody else. And so if every male has that mindset, and many men do, then naturally the women are going to adapt and the women are going to become more promiscuous. The women are going to become more promiscuous because that is what the environment is. And the women who are not, they're just not going to get taken out. They're not going to be taken. They're not going to gain any male attention. And I always wish, I saw that video and I always wish I could find it. Where it was a very, very beautiful woman. And she said, there is no reward for a woman being not promiscuous. She said, if you're not doing any of these things, you're not going to get any money. The guys aren't going to take you out. There's no incentive for women to be that way. And so even though men say that they want women to be, a certain way, the reality is most of those men who are saying that are probably just not having as much access to sex as maybe some other men. And so they play the virtue role of, oh, well, we want these women who are really nice and virtuous and virgins and not sleeping around. But the reality is for many young women who date men that say that, they often get cheated on by those men. And I've often heard women say, well, I've dated men who are less attractive. And when I go out with them, they do the exact same thing. They still cheat. Why? Because that is really the mindset of what most of them have. And so as a result, if you see men, because I've seen so many different red pillars and all these different YouTubers talk about the high rate of single men and how many of these men are not in relationships. Well, if according to your belief that men control access to relationships, if there are a high number of men that are single and not in relationships, well, it's because they don't want to be in relationships. Because according to you, men control relationships, access to relationships. And so if the men are not allowing for relationships because they don't want to be in relationships, then the only thing left for the marketplace is sex. When I've gone to like Medellin or Cartagena, and when I went to Panama, and it was also very similar when I went to Cuba, and I meet some of these women that were out on the street. I go out, go out to the clubs, etc., go out for drinking. I meet many of the local women. And of course, naturally, you're going to come across women who are selling themselves. They're young, beautiful, attractive women. And having conversations with them, I would ask them, there's so many of these men that are coming to your country. Why don't you try, why are you single? You're a very beautiful woman. Why don't you try, getting involved with one of these men and try to have a relationships? And every single one of these women that I talked to all said the same thing. That's not why they're here. And so the woman adapted. And so even though the woman may have wanted relationships, but the men that were coming to these countries were coming for sex tourism. And so what happened? The women were getting taken advantage of. They were going out with these men. They would go out to dinner with these men. And of course, men know how to, as some people say, you're going to sell this bitch a dream, right? You're going to tell her, yeah, I'm here, I'm moving here. I'm looking for a Colombian girlfriend. I'm looking for a girlfriend from DR. I'm looking for a Filipina, or I'm looking for a whatever. Because realistically, they just want to sleep with them. And so these women conform. They adapt to what these men supposedly are telling them. And then they realize that they're just being used the same way that the men in their country use them. And so some people will say, well, if these women are so great, well, then why don't the men over there, why don't the men over there, wife them up? Because according to you, men control access to relationships. And so if the men don't want relationships and all you're seeing is promiscuity, that's because that's the marketplace that men have created. And the women have adapted. And so in line, that's why you see prostitution. Think of it from the standpoint of supply and demand. What comes first? The supply or the demand? Do people just start creating stuff and hope that there's going to be a demand for it? Or do you, as an entrepreneur, do you see that there is a demand for something and then you fill the void? That's exactly what happens. You see that there is a hole in the marketplace that you can fill. And so you fill the demand with supply. So why are things like OnlyFans and prostitution and pornography so prevalent and so popular? Because there is a demand. And so the women are meeting the demand. If there was a demand for relationships, then the women would meet the demand for relationships. But there is no demand for relationships. The only demand is for sexual promiscuity. And so the women adapt. They adapt to the sexual marketplace. This is why many men get confused about why supposedly women have high expectations. Oh, your standards are too high. It's a fucking cope. It's a cope from women because they can't get a relationship. And so because a woman's value is tied into having a relationship, the way women in today's sexual marketplace are able to cope is by saying, oh, I need a man with the 6'6", right? You gotta be 6 feet tall, you gotta have a six-pack, you gotta earn six figures and everything else. And of course, from the male standpoint, we look at that like that's unrealistic. But it's a cope. It's the woman's way of getting out of having to admit that she cannot get a relationship from men, because that would be a failure on her part. Because a woman is valued by the fact that she can keep a man. Myron often talks about this. So if women can't get into relationships, but they keep talking about these stupid expectations that they have, why is it? It's because it's a coping mechanism. It's a coping mechanism the same way that men control access to relationships and women control access to sex is a cope for men to blame women for their promiscuity, because it's actually the men who are promiscuous. It's male promiscuity that leads to female promiscuity, because women do not control their environment. They do not have the physical ability to control and create an environment. That's why you don't see any society that is built around women. It's always built around men. As far back as you look in time, it has always been a patriarchy. Why? because men are bigger and men are stronger and men can exert their force and they can exert their will over women. So what do women do? They adapt. The same thing happened in Jesus' time. Many of you might be familiar with where the Bible says that they brought a prostitute before Jesus and they were ready to stone her. And then Jesus said, "Let he that is without sin cast the first stone." And the people left the woman alone. And then Jesus said, "Go your way and sin no more." But do you notice who they didn't bring in that scenario? The men were very self-righteous. They brought this woman who was a prostitute, and they said, "Jesus, we know Jesus. He's 100% for the law. He's gonna agree. We need to stone this woman. She's a whore." But you know who they didn't bring? They didn't bring the men who were sleeping with the whore. They only brought the woman. And so Jesus recognized that their hearts were wicked and that they were just trying to virtue signal to him. And that's why he said, "You're right. She has broken the law. Which one of you who has not broken the law are allowed to stone her?" Jesus showing that they had to recognize that they themselves were also flawed and sinners. And this is why men say dumb things like women control access to sex, but men control access to relationships. It's their way of downplaying their participation in the sexual marketplace value of women. It's men who create the space for women to be promiscuous, and then when the women want relationships, the men turn around and say, "Oh, I can't have a relationship with a whore. You got too many bodies." But you're the ones that are sleeping with the women as a whole. Most men today are promiscuous. Even though there might be articles that talk about 1 out of 3 men over a certain period of time might not have had sexual intercourse, but it still means that 66% of men were sexually active. So if the vast majority of men are sleeping around, where are the relationships? If men control access to relationships, according to this supposed red pill tenant, the reality is that men control access both to sex and to relationships. Again, if you were to take any of these women and to put her into a religious setting where the men only prize women who are virgins, that woman will not have access to any of those men. She will be estranged from society. And so what she would have to do, if she wanted the attention of those men, she would have to adapt. This is why many good women who do not live a promiscuous lifestyle have such a hard time. And I can attest to this myself, the way I lived my life. Many of those women who wanted to be in relationships, who did not want to just be sleeping around, I would try to coerce them by telling them, sell a bitch a dream. Oh yeah, of course I want a relationship. Of course I'm going to be with you. Right? You're going to tell her whatever you want to hear, just so that you can, whatever she wants to hear, just so that you can sleep with her. And women know this. This is why women hate the hypocrisy of men. Because even though you say one thing, you do not live up to it. And so it confuses the women. And so the women, by nature, become promiscuous, because that is what most men are. Most men are promiscuous. And this is why I've said, and most people who are red pill understand this, that women adapt to the environment that you put them in. So if you don't like the way women are, you have to change the environment. Men have to become less promiscuous. This is why you're seeing articles, and I talked about this in one of my other videos, where young men are becoming more conservative. And so by nature, women are a lagging indicator of the direction that society is going, because men are the ones that make society. Women adapt to that society because they don't have the ability to exert their own will. Women cannot exert their own will onto men. That's why women are manipulative and men are straightforward, and they just say, no, this is how it is, because they can use their force to bring about that which they want. This is why women typically lack morality, because women adapt and adopt the morality of the most alpha male in their life. And if it's their father, then they're going to have the morality of that man. This is why women who are promiscuous and they go into the church environment, they learn to adapt. But women who are the opposite, who come from a church life and then they go out into the world, and all the men that they come across are promiscuous, that woman is more than likely, if she wants male attention, is going to have to adapt, and she'll have to become promiscuous. It is what it is. The problem overwhelmingly resides with men. This is why society always punishes men. This is why men are punished very heavily via the child support system and via alimony. Because at the end of the day, society knows that it is men who bear the responsibility. It is men who bear the fault. This is why many of the women get upset with men. That we're the least, black women say we're the least protected. Why are black women so promiscuous? Is it because they want to be promiscuous? Or is it because their men desire them to be promiscuous? Think of it from your own perspective. If you're watching this and you're a woman, do most of the men try to sleep with you, or are most of the men trying to get to know you? Are you trying to get to know the women that you come across, or are you trying to sleep with this woman within the first, second, or third date? What do you expect the women to do? Women cannot exert their force over men. It is what it is. You have to be the change that you want. And for society to change, to get rid of this promiscuous mindset, the men have to change. Back when I was much younger, when I was a teenager back in the 90s, you didn't see as many men willing to sleep with women that had girlfriends or that were in relationships or married. Because back then, men typically respected if a woman was in a relationship. Now they don't care. And many women can affirm this statement that men don't care if they're in a relationship. So the women adapt. The women adapt to getting male attention, and their hypergamous nature gets the better of them because it's the men who require it of them. Men just take advantage of the situation. This is why the Bible said in the book of Genesis, where God said to Eve that because you sinned, I will increase your birth pangs and your craving will be for your husband. And many of these people, even though you might say, well, they're not married, but they're living as if they're acting as if they're husband and wife. When you're sleeping around with these women and they're acting and they're performing all the roles that a wife would do, it is as if she has become your wife. Because if you lie down with a woman that has always been, as far back as you can go, that has been what a woman would do with her husband, she would lie with him. And so from God's standpoint, when you're lying with all these women, you're in essence acting as their husband. This is why society holds men to a much higher standard than women. Because at the end of the day, just like when Adam and Eve sinned, who did God go to first? He went first to Adam. Even though Eve was the one who sinned first, he went to Adam and he asked him, why did you eat? And then Adam said, oh, it was the woman you gave me. And then God proceeded to go to Eve and asked Eve, why did you sin? Because men are in charge. Men will always be in charge. Regardless of what goes on in our society today, men will always be in charge and men will always be responsible. You have to be the change in society that you want. And if you want women to change and to be less promiscuous, then you have to be less promiscuous. Anyway, this video is getting a lot longer than I intended. I'm going to leave it here. Thanks for watching. And of course, feel free to leave your comment below and I'll check you next time.